Hi, hello everybody, and welcome to our session on best practices for measuring engagement across streaming services. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a short introductory presentation just to set the scene for some of these big questions that we're going to address on this panel. So, let me start with a brief overview of what we're talking about here to get a better sense of what these questions could be for this space. Okay, so I want to start by showing you the inevitable, what you already know. Streaming is an inevitable part of the transition into a digital future for video. So right now we have approximately 80% of the overall TV industry is focused around traditional pre-digital forms of engagement, linear broadcast, linear pay TV, and the streaming element makes up about 20%. Fast forward 5 years, and there'll be a 10% additional growth into streaming, which will bring it up to about 30%. So even though the direction of travel is moving towards streaming, there's still a lag in the revenues following, and that's one of the key challenges we'll be discussing in this panel is what metrics, what numbers, what are the Moneyball questions you need to be asking to understand how you can accelerate that process of monetizing the digital opportunities that are now becoming ever more present. So this is another area which we will cover in this panel to a significant extent. It's the idea about advertising. What is the role of advertising in the streaming video landscape, and how much does it need to differentiate itself from the linear model, and how much can it be iterated to be relevant to these new digitally native audiences which are engaging with the new landscape around ad-supported video. And this data here is just looking at ad responsiveness across a number of key markets which my company, Media Research, we've been tracking quarterly consumer survey questions asking these specific questions. And right now, advertising is in a challenging place for the digital landscape. And one of the areas we'll address in the panel is how do we rectify that? How do we make advertising relevant and a way to actually build a meaningful streaming service engagement for streaming audiences? So another area we're going to talk about is how do you cut through when you have so many competing services and you have a situation which we at Media Research describe as peak attention. So the understanding that there's no longer any greenfield space left because the smartphone evolution has meant that everybody has access to entertainment at any one time. So now if you want to cut through and have relevance, you effectively need to weaponize your content. You need to find a way to increase awareness, increase viewing on linear and non-linear, and then crucially focus on the streaming growth opportunity. So again, goes back to that piece about advertising, how it fits into this new landscape. And here's just an example of ways that this can be done. So we have one of the tools we have at Media Research is a tool called Media Index. We're tracking 500 shows, and we're tracking engagement and sentiment and the ability to create relevant content that lives outside the distribution networks. And in this example, Black Mirror, the Netflix original, is very effective at reaching streaming audiences. So it's something which we will explore in this panel. How do you optimize content? How do you optimize the metrics to be able to get a sense of the value proposition of that content as well? Okay, so that's just a little blurb about us. If you'd like to find out more, we have a weekly blog coming out about us and what we do. And I'm just going to go back to the title page. And now we're going to get on with the actual panel itself. Okay, so what we're going to do is each of my esteemed panelists are going to introduce themselves and what they do, and then we will start the debate. Okay, so I'd like to start with yourself, James.
Hi, my name is James Cahal. I'm Chief Technical Officer for Toon Goggles, an on-demand entertainment platform for kids, and co-CEO of Otera Incorporated, which is a white label OTT solution.
Awesome. I'm Nick Cicero, Vice President of Strategy at Conviva. I was the former CEO and founder of a company called Del Mondo that built the first analytics for Snapchat and Instagram Stories and Facebook Watch. And today I lead for Conviva, a real-time streaming intelligence platform. So we work with some of the large companies that you guys probably heard about here today and yesterday, like CBS and Hulu and others that measure every single second of video on every single screen through our platform.
Hi, I'm John Taylor. I am the Global EVP of Data Strategy for an ad agency called Essence. We specialize in very data-driven multi-channel media planning and buying for clients such as Google, NBCU, Target, BT, T-Mobile, amongst others. I haven't founded any companies, but there's still time.
Thank you. Okay, so each of the panelists have their own unique perspective on the questions which we're going to talk about in this panel. So I think I'd like to start with getting a sense of what actually matters. If we're talking about this transition into a streaming landscape, if we're talking about the importance of understanding content and understanding how to create relevant content and relevant user experiences that allow sustainable business models to then develop as a consequence, what are the key metrics that we need to track? So, James, I'd like to start with yourself, because obviously you wear two hats with your current roles, and you're seeing two different perspectives on the importance of being able to understand the metrics and is importance to be able to forward project the outcomes from understanding those metrics. So from your perspective, what really matters for you to be able to make meaningful business decisions, to be able to act upon this streaming landscape we're moving into?
Well, I think at the core of it, in any business that we're operating, the content is there to entertain, but it's obviously there to monetize and make money. And on one side, I have the kids space where we do have some limitations when it comes to things like COPPA and privacy protection, where we try to look at a very broad space of saying this is the general behavior of the audience. This is how kids respond to various advertising, and try to use that data to effectively make sure that we are providing advertising that kids will be receptive to. So maybe it could be new toys that are coming out, new shows on different platforms, whatever it may be, using that data to best serve our audience and keep them engaged. On the flip side, on the Otera side, we have much more general audience where we're building OTT services for niche genres worldwide. And in those, a lot of the times we have feature films, and it's about trying to figure out the optimum ad loading, because we may have much more targeted audiences. So we know that we can use that data to get advertising that is highly focused, but then trying to optimize how we do that advertising so that we get people to watch as many ads as possible. I think the general approach people assume is the more ads you have, the more money that can be made. But in our sense, we work very hard to do A/B testing to determine what kind of ad load do we have, what kind of pre-roll ads, what kind of mid-roll ads, what kind of post-roll ads, and what timing they are, and seeing if we keep standard, cable TV type ad breaks every 16 minutes or whatever, versus saying let's do a light ad load at the beginning of a 2-hour movie and do a heavy ad load after the users are engaged at the end of a 2-hour movie, doing A/B testing to test those things and determine what's optimal to generate the most revenue.
Okay, so thanks. So Nick, your Conviva in some ways almost has a unique ability to get under the hood and actually be able to get metrics about absolute engagement and the amount of time spent with content. Mm-hmm. With that amazing overview of the streaming landscape, What do you believe are the actionable metrics which really matter for both your own business, but also for other participants offering video streaming services in the current landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's hard because it's a broad question, because I think it depends on what side of the business that you really work in. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest challenges that we face today, is that every group has their own set of KPIs of what makes a great streaming business, but really it's about how they actually come together and they share that data across and kind of combine that to actually make it valuable to their entire service. So from our side, I mean, some of the more common things that we see, because we track that whole video journey, you are looking at the relationship of play time, average minutes per unique, the retention or completion rates through those videos. And we're doing this across owned and operated and social as well. So how many unique viewers am I getting across both platforms? Because a lot of our customers see the fragmented landscape today, and they're licensing content and producing content on third-party platforms like Facebooks and YouTubes and Snapchats. And they're also creating very similar content or longer form, higher value, quote unquote, content on their owned and operated platforms. So being able to get an understanding of who is watching what types of content where all throughout their day is something really important. But it's also important to be able to measure that with one type of single approach to that. Because if you're watching Game of Thrones on your phone, and then I go in and watch it on my Apple TV, and then I might wake up and go to work the next day and pull it up on my iPad, how is the streaming provider supposed to know that you're actually the same person? And so for us, it's really not just a challenge to solve what are the right metrics, because I think customers will sometimes define their own, but it's also how do you make these metrics accessible to everybody in the organization? Because somebody on the technical team is going to look at the amount of video start failures that might be happening on a particular piece of content, and if I paid a lot for that piece of content and I'm not actually driving and converting viewers, I'm losing a ton of money. So there are core metrics depending on what side of the business that you're on, but I think attention is really the key here, because it's something that we can really measure well. We all only have the same 24 hours in a day. Even though we can consume a multitude of content on multiple of devices, time doesn't change for any human. So it's really interesting to be able to then see what are those patterns of behavior as they move from platform to platform.
Thank you. Now, John, I think Nick has hit upon something which I know that yourself and your team at Essence are really focusing on, around making meaningful third-party metrics that can give you the confidence to be able to invest in new platforms and new forms of engagement. Could you talk a bit more about what those challenges are and what you believe needs to be addressed to be able to accelerate this transition into streaming?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we think about an advertiser's plan, we don't think in terms of platforms. We can't think in terms of platforms. We have to think in terms of campaigns and audiences, and we have to be able to speak to those audiences and measure the impact of how we speak to them across many different environments. And despite the explosion of AVOD-powered services, the kind of challenge remains the same. It's a cacophonous place to be as an advertiser, to make the selections that you need to make to reach the audiences, because for all of the power of addressability that comes with new technology, it's not necessarily the point where you can scale that across an entire media plan to hit the overall comms goals that you're looking for in your marketing. So we need to consider AVOD services in the context of even linear TV, and have to think about video on a more total basis. And there are not very many ways that we can scale up what you were just talking about in terms of measuring engagement metrics across that whole spectrum. It's getting better, but it's still hard. I think I grew up in doing digital media over the last sort of 15 years, and up until relatively recently, I was used to a diet of preeminent single publisher side and advertiser side ad serving technologies. And that just isn't present in this space, and it probably never will be. So we've got to a point now where we are challenged to think about a bigger and probably albeit probabilistic model for how to measure audience engagement across different services on a sort of holistic video perspective, but also a kind of a way of thinking about how to do that to sort of understand the market. Because, you know, we can break down video delivery into sort of 3 fundamental bits, kind of same old like linear TV, which is mostly live sports, live news, events, kind of single unit copy splitting through like local MVPD inventory, and then everything that's impression based, data driven and addressable. That portion will probably eat most of the rest of that over time, but that model belies like, you know, a pretty complex array of technology, data, processes, and frankly, like business relationships that don't help, you know, find a way to normalize audience engagement across platforms. So getting to understanding what the sort of anatomy of modern television, video, sight, sound, motion, however you want to think about it, above the platforms that it's delivered through is probably our and our clients' biggest challenge at the moment.
Okay, I think that also leads on to another really interesting aspect of this is how much do we need to translate what's worked in the analog world into the digital world, and how much should we rethink what are the keys to success for aspects like integrating advertising into video engagement? I know, James, you've done a lot of ultimate variant testing around the relevance and the appropriateness of ad loads for your services. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the beauties of OTT and streaming in general is the idea that we can hit a specific audience and we can have advertising that's tailored to a specific audience. In linear TV, of course, we have Nielsen ratings and we have sort of different surveys that can be done to try to figure out an audience for a show, and then we can do advertising that sort of hits that audience. But on the OTT side, we can collect information that's much more granular that allows us to determine this is the type of advertising that will engage the user. This is the type of advertising that a user will watch and continue to watch through it. And you know, on our side, it's up to us as a provider of OTT to ensure that we make recommendations to our clients and to our own products to determine this is the type of advertising that should be used. This is how tailored and how targeted it needs to be, and this is how we need to present it, right? The standard presenting it, just taking the data and saying, well, okay, we're going to start with the video advertising before every video. We're going to have advertisements spread out throughout the video. That may not be the right approach. It may be that, you know, what Facebook Watch has shown is that mid-roll advertising has been incredibly successful. Putting say on Facebook, if you had a pre-roll ad before every video you saw on your timeline, that would definitely not be that successful. And for us, you know, it's interesting because we can see such a wide variety of the space, from the kids side to the Asian market targeted side, to the cooking side, to the news side. Each one of these different types of services with different genres of content are going to have different ad tolerances, different metrics that we need to measure. And by collecting this data and looking through it and connecting this data with the type of content, so we can harvest, this was the genre of the content, this was the length of the content, this is the number of ads that were watched, and this is the number of ads that people actually got through. Use that data to help then project what the future ad loading should be, and whether it should be 5-second ads, 15-second ads, 30-second ads, and how those are spaced to try to maximize revenue for clients.
Okay. Nick, from your perspective of working with the really big players who are now moving into this space in DTC, so November the 12th, Disney Plus launches. We've got Apple TV Plus launching 12 days earlier, and then of course we've got NBCU's Peacock launching, HBO Max launching in Q1 next year as well. Do you feel that those new services have the same awareness which James has talked about how you need to update that engagement model? So admittedly, with the exception of Peacock, none of those other services have explicitly stated they're going to have advertising in that model, and it will be a subscription model. But there is still very much that engagement piece about it. But for Peacock, there is absolutely going to be an ad load element to it. And even Disney, obviously the majority owner now in Hulu, has to factor in advertising. How much are these big players moving to the space, how much are they thinking about updating those advertising engagement models?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're seeing primarily is kind of two schools of thought in terms of like a core competency, right? So I'm either going to be a full ad-supported model or ad-supported and tying in with kind of my carriage deals or more of my linear existing packages. And then you have somebody that is kind of changing the model and might do a blend of direct-to-consumer, like what Disney is doing. You might have a slice of live that has an obvious ad insertion component that can help support that. And then you have extensions into social, right? So ESPN selling content directly to Facebook or other areas. So you have kind of two schools of thought right now, and I think that you have one group of people that want to diversify by putting ads right up front, and another group that want to diversify by really going direct to the consumer. And so ultimately, I think that both of the approaches are unique in their own way because it really is about the content and the experience that you're developing on that platform. Right, I think we see with Disney Plus, they're building a rabid fan community, right, with people that are they're literally trading on a legacy of IP that probably no other single organization has the caliber of creative and characters and stories that somebody like Disney has. So the way that they can go and monetize and build an entire basically suite of streaming services underneath this Disney brand is going to be fundamentally different from somebody like even an NBC and a Comcast who might have a lot of different properties but not necessarily the same brand value and equity that a Disney might.
Okay. John, do you speak to these big traditional media players? What's your feeling on how they're looking into this measurement metric piece for being able to translate what has worked for the last 40 years in linear programming with the ratings, being able to understand what that model looks like, being able to communicate that effectively to their advertising partners? With this new DTC era opening up, how are those companies? How are they feeling about it? Do they feel like that there are questions there which they have a sense of what those questions are? Do they know the known unknowns, or are they aware that they don't know the unknown unknowns?
I don't know if they don't know the unknown.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they've got a strong sense of how they need. I mean, their challenge is really to start to think about again how you sort of normalize those two ways of measuring things. Like OTT services come with a huge basket of metrics, all of a sudden that you could never acquire in an old delivery system. I think for like the business, as a business owner, I think they have to think carefully about like what are the ones that matter. Because I think having been through some of this with a couple of such companies, you can get to a point where the amount of data almost becomes a bit of a distraction rather than enabling you and empowering you to kind of drive the business in the direction that you want. But I think it comes back to the same thing I was saying before. We have to find a way to sort of normalize those, impression-based delivery metrics and unit-based delivery metrics in a way that's more singular, but is also like more, but is not dragged down by the lack of responsiveness that unit-based metrics and traditional measurement allows you to have. I mean, I think we're on the hunt as an agency. I guess we're on the hunt for different data layers because I think while whatever these new services and the big media companies, whatever they can conjure up from a measurement perspective, I still expect them to be reasonably siloed. So we're looking at, albeit nascent technologies, like automated content recognition and other things to do with computer vision, machine learning, which actually looks at who's watching a screen in computer language to tell us things that we simply couldn't learn through the infrastructure otherwise. So from the advertiser's perspective, I think that we have to think really broadly and be really open-minded about like what data is valuable and how we can kind of harmonize that into a single model. I mean, everything that comes to you and all the things that you can pass through your service is really, really valuable to us. Everything that you have presumably probably has some value as well. But we've got to put that side by side in a mosaic with a bunch of other things and apply a bigger model to understand what's really going on. So to the extent to which the traditional media companies can input into that with the new metrics that they can generate through their new services, all the better. But I still think it will be incumbent on agencies to figure out how to see that bigger picture.
And
relationships, right? I was just going to say, it's like, to tie into that, I mean, it is really more about the relationships too, because I know that, and we've heard from some other panelists at some other sessions that are trying to kind of create coalitions or create partnerships, and some of those things are really important for both the publisher side, let's call it, as well as the advertising side, because they are symbiotic, right? Unless you're going to be going pure play right to your customer and you're never going to serve an ad to them, you're going to have a relationship when it comes to data sharing. And I think that's one of the things that we're starting to see now that a lot of the internet is delivered, or a lot of the video is delivered over the internet. We have to remember that the internet wasn't built to deliver video. And so now that streaming video has become the #1 medium of consumption through the internet. That means that we can track and we can measure more things than ever before, and it can be on an apples to apples basis, because every one of the ways that we access the internet has device IDs, all sorts, and but it's not going to work, like you said before, to the silo, and that's why there does need to be some give and take across all parties, because if you can go in and transact with the same household ID, let's say across NBC, across Hulu, across Fox, that's infinitely more valuable, and you actually would pay those publishers more to be able to do those things. So you can actually make more money by actually starting to collaborate with other folks, and the internet is really the way that you can do that, right? So you don't have to go to third parties, although ACR data is awesome for adding additional levels and layers on top of the data, as you said before, but going right to a lot of these partners, we should start to see a lot more collaboration. I know that we are as well.
Yeah, I think that, there's very few like technical inhibitors at this point. It's versus on the business side of things. So to your point, if we could get to what we really want is like fewer, if not a singular, ideally, like point of control for all of this stuff. And point of analysis. We might never get to that, but the extent to which that can be consolidated helps us tremendously.
So James, how practical is that from your business perspective, with your twin hats, with providing some of the tech infrastructure with running a D2C business? How practical is it to be able to actually get this to reach towards this unifying source of truth for understanding what is meaningful with these metrics?
Well, I'd say I think you have to step back and really look at the big picture and what's your long-term goals. If it's looking at a single campaign and trying to figure out how effective this one campaign can be, yes, you may have some success in the short term, but you really need to understand your audience and understand what is going to make your service and company successful in the long term. And I think it's really interesting to see some of the unique things that can be done. I personally see a lot of the future of the advertising industry being much more of the subliminal advertising. And if you look at one thing that Netflix has been very successful at, they're not an advertising-based service, but they're an advertising-based service, right? Every single film that they make has ad placements for different products within the movies that they create. And as a content provider and a technology provider, we look at the perspective of, we understand how to make content, we understand how to use technology. So we look at this idea of, what if we could make content that had different products built into the scenes, and with the power of adaptive bitrate streaming, where we build videos that are chunks as they are, we can have one consumer get one stream that has this chunk that shows a Pepsi can on the table in a scene, and this other user, we can have the exact same scene except it has a Coke can on the table in the scene. To the end user, they have no idea that they're looking at advertising, but for us, we can get immense data to see, well, this user ended up sticking around and watching more of the show, this user did not. this user, and that kind of data to Coca-Cola or Pepsi could be invaluable because it could help them gauge, well, you know, this in this movie that was targeted to this audience, this person seemed to be receptive to this portion. In this movie, they were not. And if we can use that data, then that will drive the type of campaigns that we can put into the apps and into production and different things. And by marrying the story creation with the technical side and doing unique things that could never be done on linear, then that's where you get to the point where you could essentially have free TV where people feel like they're never watching advertising, yet billions of dollars of advertising are being spent, and the advertisers are happy because they have the data they want, the consumers are happy because they feel like they're just getting a free product, which everybody seems to want.
Everybody likes free.
Yeah.
Okay. And how, this sounds like a bold vision, what you're talking about. So I know you have some of those pieces already in place. How soon do you envisage this happening?
I think it could happen today. A lot of the technologies that we built to make interactive video, like the choose your own adventure style stuff, is the exact same technologies that are going to be used for this type of thing. And I think the bottleneck, of course, is always going to be the ad side of it. You know, the ad industry buying into this. You know, the delay in advertising revenue for streaming, I think, is a lot based upon the idea that companies that are advertising, they're afraid of streaming because they don't know it well enough. When talking about passive and subliminal advertising, that's just another layer. You know, it's even deeper into something that's not really understood. But I think when the data comes out and you can see that you're getting 10 times more value out of the money being spent, maybe, you know, that is the thing that's going to drive the budgets moving. The budgets aren't going to move unless there's some kind of big bottom line driver at the end of the day.
So actually what you might be saying, when not trying to put words in your mouth, but it seems like one of the potential big wins here is you could actually make advertising both more relevant but actually more lucrative for all the participants involved.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Wow, excellent. So we have we've got 9 minutes before the end of this panel, and we'd like to open up the floor to questions if there are any questions. Does anyone have any questions for the panelists on what we've been discussing? Yeah.
It'd be great if you could give us a little bit more insight as to what the major customers specifically are asking from a data standpoint. What metrics are they? Do they care about on the Conviva side? The top, what are the top of minds for you?
So just to reiterate, what are the key metrics that are being asked by your customers for your business?
Like I said, once again, it really depends on which group of the business that you sit in. So, right, we have technical teams that are looking at the quality of experience. And so for them, things like rebuffering rate is essential, right, to be able to know, or video start failure, to know, like, am I reaching an appropriate level? And oftentimes they'll come to us and want to get benchmarking data from, like the 3-5 billion devices that we're tracking against. So you have those things, which is crucial for the experience of the video. Like I said, if I don't have a good video, I'm not going to actually stick around and watch the content probably. From the core content side itself, I think we're starting to see people want to segment behaviors. A lot of like what you were talking about. And really, it's like, how can I start to segment my users into different groups or different cohorts to be able to see the results of different types of behaviors that they might be looking at. So maybe it's attributes around completion rates of a weekend person, who's somebody who's just tuning in on the weekends and watching content. Maybe you are looking at somebody that you might define as a binger, who is just somebody that might be burning through some of those top pieces of content and churning out of your platform. So starting to kind of combine what are the core consumption metrics, like minutes and average watch time and retention rate throughout those different videos. And then from kind of a recent development since we joined Conviva about a year ago now is more of these large customers than ever before are now taking signals from social to understand what are people talking about, what are the things that are resonating, even the things that they don't like and that they're complaining about, right? Oftentimes, the content and the quality, if you haven't built in interactive features, you can't really have a dialogue. That's one of the things I personally would love to see change. I think I just saw a news article that said Hulu's going to let you do like likes and certain types of engagement metrics on the content. And certainly coming from the social space, it is inherent to us that if we're streaming a full-length UEFA game on Facebook, we're going to have polls and interactive elements and things that are going to tie that user together, and we can see direct feedback right under that video. That's one of the things that I still think is missing in a lot of the streaming platforms today, where we can look at viewers' engagement, but ultimately they're very silent. So we have to watch their behavior and make assumptions based on that, but it'd be great to tie in that feedback loop. So those on the experience and on the content side obviously are really interesting. And then obviously on the social side, I think it's really about trying to now combine the breadth of my audience. So you do have companies today, you guys are from Whistle? Yeah, so like perfect example, right? So you guys have, you have partnerships with every major social platform that you're distributing your own content to make money through branded content or through influencers. You're licensing that content. Facebook's buying it from you, Snapchat's buying it from you, and then you're trying to build your own type of subscription, type of a business, right? So you have a totally different approach than somebody that might even be starting from the legacy streaming idea, right? Because you guys are inherently social. So I think it is really interesting when you start to take somebody like yourself, or as I mentioned with Disney or ESPN and Fox Sports are two of our large customers for streaming and social data. So being able to see what they're able to do and how they're looking at each one of these services differently. Red Bull, another great example. So when you have this always-on model, you're going to make a little bit of a different monetization decision on each one of those platforms. But the way to do that ultimately is kind of going back to what you said, is not look at them as platforms and look at them as viewers or pieces of content unified across these different surfaces. And so that's where it does tie back to the consumption, the metrics, the uniques, and being able to look at them across multiple different devices in that more real-time fashion.
And I think you bring up a good point there in the fact that right now, basically every service out there is a pure content consumption service, Netflix, Hulu, whatever. And what we've been trying to push amongst our clients is the concept of, especially since our clients are typically genre-based clients, they're very niche service targeted in a specific genre, is to build a community and not just a place to watch content, right? So within the application, build your own. We build their own like Instagram-like service, so they can have posts and things where people can like and comment, and so you can have a community about the content. Provide people blog entries, provide people all the experiences they want, and then provide them all of the opportunities to watch content the way that they want. Meaning, don't just build a VOD app. Build a VOD app that has linear built into it. Build a VOD app that has catch-up built into it. Whatever it may be, so that if a user wants to watch 5 minutes of content, they can, or 2 hours of content, or if they just want to have a discussion about some piece of content they had, have it on your platform versus always having to push people back out to Facebook and Instagram and other platforms.
Yeah, I think we just see that today. I mean, we have like a streaming TV leaderboard that we curate that has all of like the social engagement data from all these streaming platforms. And obviously Netflix kills everybody, right? Like Netflix has probably 50 to 60 Instagram accounts alone, let alone probably all the other. They're constantly activating. And I think that's the one big, for me, that seems to be super important, right? Is unless you're having a back and forth dialogue with your consumers, you're not really having a direct to consumer business. And so like if I'm going to expect that I'm spending all this money on all this amazing content, I am creating and investing into this amazing platform, and then people come in, try it, and then they leave, well, what have I actually done? And so retaining users is super important. And if you're not building the hooks right into your platform to retain and engage users in there, you have to figure out where you're going to activate them elsewhere. It's really no different than marketing your TV show, except now you're trying to actually go after a lot more of a person's attention over a given day, because you are competing again with television and with social platforms and all these other places that can take our attention. So why is your platform the place that I want to be hanging out, that I want to go to? It's got to be a place that has community and dialogue. Right? The titles that you put up there, right? Like that's not streaming second by second data that create some of those brand awareness or those streaming numbers, those are based on people describing them and talking about them. And you saw that in that last screen when it talked about the actual streaming percentage, you saw 2 Netflix titles, and you totally different view when it comes to brand awareness for other types of shows. So there's a totally different world when somebody asks you what you like and then what you watch, and trying to have that engagement will really develop that recall, which ultimately leads to retention to build that user base.
Fantastic. And perfectly for the organisers of the event, we're finishing exactly on time. So unfortunately, we don't have any additional questions. So I'd like to thank James, I'd like to thank Nick, and I'd like to thank John for their participation. And thank you for all for being here. Thank you. Bye.